Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Joining us today is a friend and therapist, Josh Korac. Josh, thank you so much for being with us and joining us in these conversations on the benefits of autonomic healing.
Hey, Tom, it's my pleasure. Sorry I lost my voice. I hope this isn't too much of a rough listen for your listeners.
No, it's got that gravelly kind of...
little rough, masculine edge.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go. I'm sorry, listeners.
You don't have to be sorry, Josh, at all. We love having you here, and you're a practicing mental health counsellor in Broomfield, Colorado. You've also got your own podcast called Care with Korac, and you actually interview therapists from all over. In fact, you just recorded a session with Tom that will be, when's that going to be airing?
Hopefully sometime in May. I'm recording season 2 right now, so we're figuring that out.
Yeah, that's so cool. So guys, if you're listening, check it out, check that podcast out. But one of the things that we love about you, Josh, is that you're clearly a passionate advocate for therapy, for healing. And before we get started with some of your experiences with AHA, I'd love to hear when all this started for you. You know, when did you start developing this passion for the therapy space, and why did you choose to become a mental health counsellor? Could you kind of rewind a little bit and just fill us in?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, my mental health journey started when I was a kid. When I was about 16 years old, I started going to counseling for the first time. It wasn't by choice. It was definitely a mandated thing by my parents. It was a family therapy kind of deal. I was super resistant, super defensive to it at first, and I loved it. I mean, Clinton Donnelly, I'll shout his name forever, was my counselor, still is, and has just been a huge support, huge mentor, has shaped me both professionally, personally, and has just completely changed my life. And so that kind of just started the whole journey towards becoming a counselor. I mean, from high school, I just made natural sense to go into psychology for my undergrad. Nothing else seemed to fit. You know, business was never my thing. I don't even know what else is there really to major in college.
Music, which is what I did.
Music,
It's worth a little more than a Pizza Hut coupon now.
Yeah, that's fair. I just feel like everybody I knew in college majored. All my roommates were business majors. So psychology just seemed the natural fit for me. I was always a people person. I always was that friend who people came to, and that just seems to be a stereotypical thing for most counselors, is just being that person. And so went into psychology for my undergrad, finished up a little bit early, and then I went to the University of Northern Colorado right after and got my master's degree. And so, you know, through that, I've had just some pretty wonderful experiences, some pretty, just experiences I'm eternally grateful for, even though they were challenging and shaping. But I had the chance to work in inpatient psychiatric hospital settings. I got to work in a jail as a counselor. I got to work with those who struggle with developmental and intellectual disabilities. I mean, I've just had so many different varying experiences that just introduced me into the world of mental health care, and it's just been such a wonderful journey. And so now I'm in a private practice space in Broomfield with Sojourn Counseling under Trace Stubbs, and it's been great since. So
Tell us a little bit about your podcast, Care with Korac. How long has that been?
Yeah. So, you know, as a grad student, almost through his program, I thought, you know, why not add just a little bit more to my plate? Because that makes sense with a full-time job and a full-time class load. And I'm like, yeah, you know, why not? And so I started, I started Care with Korac, which is a podcast that is focused on mental health care. But what I find is pretty unique about it is it's not just mental health professionals that I interview. I've had the chance to definitely interview mental health professionals. I mean, this season I'm really excited to have Dr. Lloyd Sederer, who is the chief psychiatrist in New York, who led the 9/11 disaster response and Hurricane Sandy, and today, actually later today, hopefully, with my voice, but hopefully I'll be interviewing Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who was the psychologist who profiled the BTK killer, a serial killer based out of Kansas. And so I definitely get more of the psychology side of things. But I've also had a chance to just interview more personal stories. In my first season, I had a outdoor rock climbing guide named Cody Bradford who shared on his experiences with suicide, his mental health journey. And it's just been a very wonderful space to just meet new people and have them share their story, kind of like today. I also believe in the power of narrative and just sharing your story. And it's just so powerful. And so, yeah. And so it's the first season's out. There's 13 episodes and I'm working on the second season now. And just a wide variety of guests, wide variety of topics. This season I think I'm going to be talking about eating disorders, somatic therapy with Tom, yoga, what else? So many other things. So would love for you to check it out. If Tom's podcast is one that you like, then it's pretty similar in style.
Yeah.
So
It sounds so cool just hearing that journey. But here we are, we're on the Autonomic Healing podcast, and you're here because you've had this intersection and connection with Tom, and you're actually currently looking at being trained and certified to be an AHA practitioner, which we're super excited about, right, Tom?
Oh, yeah.
But I'm just curious, can you fill us in? How did you guys meet?
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of a funny roundabout story where one of my personal clients, when I was working back up in Greeley, I was doing school and work in Greeley for the past, 3 years. And so I had a client up there through the Department of Human Services, which they had a contract with another counselor that Tom had trained. And so my client had been referred both to me and to Chris, for Chris to do the AHA and for me to just treat trauma and just to treat in general, some other things. And so with this client, I had been screening her for trauma pretty regularly. So in the counseling world, there's a screening instrument called the PCL5, and that's a screening inventory that assesses for symptomatology for post-traumatic stress disorder. And so if they meet a certain threshold on it, then it's an easy way of diagnosing PTSD. And
keeping track of what's happening with that. Either
exactly.
It's going up and getting worse as far as the symptoms, or it's hopefully progressing in a downward trajectory.
Exactly. It's easily both diagnosis and treatment planning in terms of, is what we're doing together working or is it not? And so with her, this client, she was consistently scoring pretty high, right? Which is just natural, regardless of trauma therapy. Like it's natural for them to start out pretty high for first month,
Treating
couple months,
post-traumatic stress
several
is,
months.
generally speaking, a very long-term process.
Mm-hmm. Generally. We'll get to that.
Okay.
And so I had seen her for, I can't even remember, a couple months maybe. And so she kept me informed. She's like, oh yeah, so I have my AHA session coming up. And I met with her in the beginning of the week. She had this session towards the end of the week. And so I was like, okay, well, hey, excited to hear how it goes. And
wonder what that is.
yeah,
Good luck with that.
super skeptical, right? Never heard of it. I didn't do any research. Like, I was like, all right, whatever.
If I may, that reminds me of another therapist who I had a connection with, and she was doing day treatment stuff. Mm-hmm. And she had a mother who came in, and she was doing the in-home intensive family therapy, long-term kind of a thing. And she told me later that when the mother of the child she was treating came in and said, I've talked to some other moms and such, and they've done this AHA treatment with this guy, and I'm wondering, is that okay? Can I do that? And she's a nurse. And so this therapist, she told me she remembers thinking, sure, that's not going to really make any difference, but good luck with that. Sure, why don't you go ahead and do that? And then she went to the home to do a week and a half or 2 weeks later to do an in-home family session. And instead of a really disheveled, chaotic living room, the son was sitting on the couch with mom, kind of had resting his head on her shoulder. The daughter was playing on the carpet, and everything. It was. She said, "What happened? What did you? Oh, you know that AHA thing that I meant? I did that, and the kids have done that."
Well, that's a perfect story because that's exactly what happened with my client. My client went in at the end of 1 week. I saw her at the beginning of next week. So only in the span of 3 or 4 days maybe. And so did the PCL right away. Boom, 0. And so when it comes to scoring the PCL, you can have a score between 0 and 80. And there's certain criteria that you have to meet in terms of meeting the threshold for being able to diagnose and meet the criteria for PTSD. But 80 is like as high as you can get, right? And that's what
extreme. PTSD
she was scoring
symptomology.
60 plus, like very high symptomatology, high symptoms of avoidance, high symptoms of intrusiveness, things like flashbacks and nightmares, high emotional distress. So there was a lot going on. And so came in on that beginning of the week and was at a 0. A complete 0. And I was just like, what the hell? I was like, what is going on here? Like, how does it go from such severe symptomatology to nothing over the weekend?
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, well, hold up. Let's see about this. Continue to meet with her, continue to screen with her. And it fluctuates slightly, but within that 0 to 10 range.
Nothing makes us immune to stress.
Nothing makes us immune.
Yeah.
And she had a lot going on still, right? And so was a mom. I mean, and that alone just comes with stress, right? Mom to young child. And so, but within 0 to 10, which is minimal, not meeting criteria. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like, and just, I could sense it. Like, I could sense the change in her affect. She, was always coming in with just this super anxious affect and came in and it wasn't there. And I was like, what is this? What is AHA?
So that caught your attention.
Yeah, you could say that. And so I processed that first session. We just processed. I was like, what was this like for you? And just told me how, even within the first few days, like how much less reactive she had been with her daughter, which had been an ongoing issue. How much more she was able to tolerate stress. How much less, again, some of those intrusive symptoms were happening. I mean, they weren't happening. No more nightmares, no more flashbacks, no more avoidance symptoms. She wasn't trying to avoid the previous trauma.
So then you got a hold of Chris.
Yeah, so that right away I was like, I need to figure out what this is and just get a little bit more of an idea, like what is AHA? And so I reached out to Chris. Chris immediately was like, love it. Here's Tom, right? Tom is the creator. Tom is the one who does the training. So I reached out to Tom and I was like, hey, I'm just interested in learning more about this, possibly getting trained. Like, if this is something that is working, like obviously I want to be doing it. And so I reached out to Tom and here we are now.
And part of training is that you have to experience it yourself because I can't train therapists to do this. Because it is so experiential. It is a somatic treatment. And without having experienced it yourself, it's conceptual, but it's not experiential. And so to be able to work with someone who is having these involuntary neurobiological activity going on, that's homeostatic, that's normalizing all that trauma, to not have experienced it yourself, one, is an injustice to our own personal individual mental health.
Yep.
Why would we not want to do this for ourselves? And two, then to be able to interpret and have a sense of what the person the client is experiencing. It makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And I was all for that. A big part of my training in my undergrad was experiential learning. I did my minor in outdoor leadership. So whenever I think of experiential learning, I like to compare it to rock climbing, right? It's one thing to, sit in a classroom, learn about rock climbing skills, learn about how to belay somebody, how to lead climb, how to place equipment when you're, trad climbing. And it's nothing to actually do it. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so this is the exact same thing. Therapy is the exact same thing. Like a counselor could be very book smart and very poor when it comes to the application of skills. right? And so I was all for it. I'm like, I just need to try this, right? Because just like anybody else, I struggle with my own anxiety. I struggle with my own
Therapists are
periods of
human?
depressions. I know.
Oh, yeah.
Can you believe it?
Of course. That's why we can treat people, is because we know.
Exactly. I mean, and if your counselor says anything otherwise, then you may need to look at getting a new counselor because that is part of the experience, right? Your counselor has their own stuff that they're going through, and they need to be doing the work themselves to process that, and the same work that they're quote unquote prescribing you, right? And so, yeah, I'm all for experiential learning. I was like, I need to try this. I need to see what this is like.
So you did your AHA session, and maybe share just a little bit about what that was like for you.
Can I just interject here, Tom, as well? Because I just, as someone, who's not a therapist, I'm loving what I'm hearing right now from you guys. I feel really grateful that there are therapists out there who are actually going, I'm going to, if it works, I'm going to figure this out. I want to try it. Because actually you've witnessed something that's dramatically had an impact on one of your clients. And so you kind of go and you search and you try it out yourself. But like Tom was saying, we'd love to hear about your first initial AHA session.
Yeah.
How did it...
Well, and I just want to add to that too, because that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Even I'm not going to name names, but there are counselors who are just very strictly that it needs to be evidence-based. And that's great. Evidence-based research is great.
And
right?
that's very important.
And guess what? AHA is evidence-based.
It is. I just haven't published it.
He just hasn't published it. And there's a difference there, right? And so, you should be getting treatment that is evidence-based. But at the same time, treatments have to come from somewhere, right? And so... I just wanted to add that not every counselor is that. Majority of counselors are doing their own work. Majority of counselors are doing the good work out there. There are a few that aren't. And you just have to be careful when you're looking for your counselor. Make sure that you trust yourself, that you're trusting your gut, as Tom has mentioned in his last episodes.
Because
trust
part of your
yourself.
Brain's down there and it's thinking.
Yeah, trust yourself with who you're meeting with.
That's so good.
I just wanted to add that.
Yeah,
but,
that's great.
let me take a quick drink.
Yeah. So just to lead into this a little bit, you came in for your session, and with the activation, you did that. You had that interoceptive focus. You closed your eyes. You had the activation, and then you started getting the involuntary activity.
Yeah. And as Thomas said, as Ruth has said, as probably any of his clients have said, it's just weird.
I do hear that a lot.
There's just no other way to describe it. I mean, well, there is, but that's just the first reaction. This is just weird. The first hour or two, I'm just kind of sitting there okay, I'm feeling these involuntary sensations.
And maybe read a couple of these.
So some of the initial ones I had was just a lot of twitches. Right? My eye was twitching, my jaw was shaking, my breathing was changing a little bit. Just very little things, and part of me was like, am I doing this? Is this my body that's actually doing this? What is going on? And so, a lot of twitches, a lot of itches, just little things, and then every once in a while, I would have something just bizarre happen.
It's very unusual.
Like the one you just highlight. So something, I'm gonna read this. This was, I don't know, halfway through maybe. Something just happened in my head. It kind of blocked out my hearing for a second. Felt in my forehead, felt some tension. So every once in a while, it'd be weird things like that. I'd have little muscle twitches, but then every once in a while, my head would just jerk or my body would just jerk. I'm like, what was that?
Yeah, there's a line in here. Because what I'm doing is I'm just keeping track of the somatic activity. And so at one point you said, my head just kind of bumped back. And your head was tilting further to the right and then turning to the left. And there was that involuntary movement. And then you started talking about weird.
My stomach is doing the weird flexing thing again.
Yes. And if I remember, and then here...
What was that one? So weird sensation going on, the top half of my body is lopsided. My torso is angled right. then left, then right again in a zigzag pattern. Oh, that was so weird. I remember now. It was like my body was like zigzag this way. Like like the lower half of my body was one direction, another was the other, and then like it was like this weird like I felt like something out of a cartoon or something.
Yes, I've heard that a number of times. And then, interestingly, because stress and congestion and histamines and all the rest of that kind of stuff are very much linked.
Yeah.
And then at one point you shared this.
Noticing I'm a lot less congested than I was before. You know, you can't hear it now because my voice is gone, but in general, I have some pretty bad, congestion. And so, but at this period, my congestion started to be relieved, which was pretty crazy. Another one was, I don't know what just happened. Felt like something hit me in my left sternum, like being pushed.
And it's all these very unusual things. And the reason it becomes so unfamiliar and unusual is simply because the brain has not had a chance to go that deeply into normalizing the stress and trauma.
Well, sure.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, because like you've explained in your previous episodes, this is all about activating the parasympathetic and the enteric nervous systems, right? And so this is work that I do with my clients just in different ways and not in such an intensive, focused way. And I think this is more effective, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but I think
no, go ahead.
This is more effective because, like you said, it gives the body time. Like, we need the time to normalize the stress.
Yeah.
And so this is great.
Yeah, and at the end, then after the normalization had occurred, I asked you to share about how you felt now, and bearing in mind that at the beginning you had very high levels of stress and anxiety. And by the end, your comment was...
I feel really calm, peaceful. It's hard to put words to it. It just makes sense around, and then that was around just what was happening.
And you felt content.
Oh, yeah, the content.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was pretty impacting for you just to experience it yourself. And I agree with you. I think when I had my AHA session, I don't think I had ever spent that amount. I mean, you kind of go through it and you think, am I going to be bored? And then the time goes like that, there's like, it feels like you haven't been there for hours, but you have. And suddenly you're kind of giving your body the chance, and your brain really the chance to heal itself.
Yeah.
So what happened in the next,
So before that,
okay,
I love the way you have a great way with words, which obviously you've got a podcast, so that's a wonderful asset.
I hope so.
But I love the way that you expressed the sense of contentment with that phraseology.
Yeah, I said, I don't feel the competition of emotions, or my mind feels slowed down and at peace.
Yeah. And that is such a wonderful description of homeostasis. When we're in that state, not just the process of the normalizing, but we are in that state of homeostasis, we don't have that competition of emotions. And the mind feels slowed down and at peace. I was just wonderfully articulated.
Well, it was just such a genuine feeling. I mean, for the past several years, even throughout my grad program, even throughout all the self-care I was supposed to be doing, it was a really challenging, it was probably the most challenging period of my life. Going through a pretty severe breakup, going through, there was a situation with a friend going to court over some pretty serious charges that I was almost being called into. I had several moves, several job changes. Like, it was just such a big life change in the past several years. And my anxiety suffered as a result of it. And so I had gotten myself back into counseling with Clinton. I was on medication, and my mind just felt like it was racing constantly. Just not able to really manage my anxiety except when I was with Clinton. And so this was the first time in a while that I felt like a pretty strong sense of peace.
And in a prior episode, the first one actually, we talked about that tsunami of stress, that escalating pattern of flee and fight and flee and fight. And that's that sympathetic nervous system interacting with the prefrontal cortex and problem solving and decision making, but it's compromised. And because all it's trying to do is figure out, how do I flee? How do I fight? And it's not that normalization.
Yeah. I think I'd love to ask you this question, Josh, as well, about, like Tom said, we talk. I love the phrase the tsunami of stress. It is just such a sticky phrase that allows me personally to kind of understand some of those cycles. But I, as a therapist now, I'm just really curious what you're seeing right now from clients in this space. Especially in regards to the tsunami of stress. What would you say the mental health landscape is, especially for the millennials, and especially given the fact that we've had the most unusual 2 years, that, it seems to, I think we'll probably have papers written on the last 2 years and like the impact.
This is going to be the gift that keeps on giving for an entire generation. It's a watershed experience. Like World War II was generationally, Vietnam for my generation, COVID for this generation.
Yeah. So would you share what your thoughts are around that? Like, what are some of the challenges? What are you seeing? What are the changes?
Yeah. Let me start by prefacing that our generation, my generation, these upcoming generations are the safest generations in history, but we're also the most afraid. It's just true. Like we have some of the most safe spaces. We in history, there's never been safer times in terms of war. I mean, maybe this is bad timing with the war going on, but just research has shown, this is something that came up in my trauma training previously, is that we are the safest generation, but we're also the most afraid. And it brings up this big question of why, right? There is just so much of unprecedented trailblazing going on with COVID, with the digital age. I think this is jumping ahead a little bit too, but like one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing as a therapist is TikTok. Like how many, I do a lot of work with adolescents, a lot of work with kids, and how many kids coming in who are self-diagnosing themselves because of what they see on the internet.
To be able to Google all sorts of stuff, for me, that wasn't even a thing.
I mean, this is only within the last
when I was
20 years, 15 years.
Yeah, when I broke into this 20 some years ago, counseling itself as a profession wasn't that old.
Pretty young.
It wasn't. You couldn't find out information. You had to go to your doctor, and they would talk with you. You couldn't self-diagnose. The access to all sorts of information.
It's blown up.
And it's blown up. I think it's escalated dramatically in these last 2 years because of what COVID forced too. So it's like, I think it's sped up what would have happened naturally. We're way further along the line in terms of digital community. Which is great in a lot of ways. It's especially through COVID, it gave a lot of younger kids who should be around people. Like, this is so instrumental to their development, is they need to be around other kids, right? And so when they're literally forced to be separate, like that's one positive that I can see from the digital space, is them being able to continue community, continue that aspect. Well, that's not the same.
And related to that, I was hearing it was a mom talking about their child, and this was exemplary of a very common dynamic, and that her comment was her child's friendships in an online space were the same in that child's experience as the ones that were in school or in some other social contact environment. And they saw them and experienced them, whether it was an online or in physical presence. It was the same thing.
No, I'm definitely getting that off my clients. So even some of my older clients, like young adults, I had one client who literally all of their community is online. They have no physical community. So it's a thing.
We've got this dynamic then of, like you said, I think that's so interesting, the safest generation, and yet there's fear there. And so what's the root?
And I think that it is the amount of stimulus that is being encountered.
Yep. That's what I was just going to say.
There's no downtime.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a constant stream of stimulation, which I think plays into that sense of threat and fear, because the brain is having to process all this stimuli.
Yeah.
And it's literally TMI. It is too much information.
Yeah.
And it overwhelms that. You throw into that, and we're going to have upcoming episodes on rational intimacy and the cognitive processing, the prefrontal cortex, and how that problem solves, but the solutions that keep coming up because we're not actually rational. We just think we're being rational because it's understandable to us, and it seems rational to us, but that doesn't make it actually rational. And then the solutions we keep coming up with in many ways are just creating more and more problems. And then there's this endless access to more and more information.
I think I really love how you said that, this increase in stimuli. I think it's also in combination with early exposure.
Oh,
right?
Very much.
Thinking about things like movies and television, right? How easy is it to just hop onto Netflix and watch something that's rated for mature audiences as a kid, right? If their parents aren't paying attention, if they don't set those parental controls. So easy. The average age of pornography viewing for children is for children 7 or 8 years old. That's first grade, second grade.
And because of development, they don't have a relational context to put that kind of information in. And so it just becomes objectification. Human beings are objects, not to be related to,
100%.
but to be utilized and manipulated.
And so we're getting so much information taking in, and at such a young age when our brains are so malleable, so easily changed, it creates so much stress. Yeah. It really does. It changes our physiology.
Yep.
And I think that really has influence as they grow up.
Yeah. So, which leads me to bringing up the second aspect of homeostasis, and that's not just the somatic homeostasis, which is AHA, but there's also that component, which we're going to be getting into in upcoming episodes, of the cognitive homeostasis, where we can activate, and I figured out a way to activate the involuntary autobiographical cognitions or memories for the prefrontal cortex in combination with that somatic homeostasis to do the problem solving and then to inform with these involuntary autobiographical memories, which have been so much a part of post-traumatic stress, the intrusive thoughts. And a lot of the research that was done about involuntary autobiographical cognitions and memories was from the perspective of post-traumatic stress. These intrusive memories and experiences and flashbacks and that sort of thing. But that's not the only way it manifests. And so I was intrigued, and a couple of years after I figured out how to do the somatic homeostasis, I was intrigued by the possibility of the prefrontal cortex problem solving with these involuntary autobiographical cognitions or memories, problem solving proactively, and then just informing the conscious awareness of a solution to a problem. And you followed up your somatic with the problem solving. Yeah. And maybe you could share not necessarily all the content, but your experience of activating cognitive homeostasis.
Can I start by sharing just why it makes sense to me?
Please.
So a common misconception with trauma, with PTSD, we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not a disorder. It's not something that's wrong
with
you.
Which is why the latest stuff, they've dropped the term. It's just post-traumatic stress. I mean, it is not post-traumatic stress disorder. It's post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, it's a brain injury. It's your body being injured. Yeah. And so for me, it just makes sense where we start with the somatic, right? More and more research is coming out that stress and anxiety is first and foremost body-oriented, right? Yeah, Which is why you always start with the somatic. You never just jump to the cognitive.
No. I've actually had many clients who say, can't I just do that? No. I won't do that with you.
Well, for some, I'd be curious to know if you could respond to this. For my experience, when I do the somatic work with my clients, for about 40 to 50%, the somatic's enough, where we don't have to go deep into the trauma. We don't have to do any sort of cognitive processing therapy or any sort of narrative work. For some, the somatic is enough for them to manage and to resolve their symptoms.
And the reason for that is because when we experience chronic stress or traumatic stress, and it's at those, particularly at the ages of cognitive formation, perceptions are being formed of ourself and others and situations. The stress and trauma distort that. And it depends on when in life that's been experienced. And so that traumatized perceptions of self, others, and situations is what necessitates for many not just a somatic normalization, but also the value and benefit of a cognitive homeostasis, because to be able to see the pattern of perceptions and how they have been subtly or profoundly distorted. It's like, I'll give you an example. Back in the day, a few years ago, there was a case with offenders who, to have contact with their child, had to pass a particular polygraphs related to that. And if there was any abnormality or deception indicated, or just reactivity, that the standard was, we don't allow contact with the child. And so that case was actually taken constitutionally to the federal court in Denver. Wow. And I was the expert witness for that. And I remember testifying. And it was an interesting experience, because as I was testifying, I was going into the neuroscience and all the rest of this. And I remember the attorney said, "Mr. Powles, I appreciate your testimony. Could you put that in layman's terms?" And then I tried putting that in more layman's terms. And then the presiding magistrate said, "Mr. Powles, I really hate to interrupt your testimony, but could you put that in real layman's terms?" And this is the example I used. And this is an example of the distortion that can happen to the perceptions of ourselves, others, and situations. And I said, "So, Your Honor, let's say that there's a little boy, and he is just brilliant. He is incredibly intelligent. He always gets A's on all of his tests and classwork and all the rest of that, but he's not terribly athletically gifted. And he encounters gym class and climbing that rope and ringing that bell and all that. It's just really beyond him. But he tries his hardest and he does his best. And he gets a B. And he comes home with a B on his report card for the first time in his life. And unfortunately, his father, not being terribly affirming and very perfectionistic and very demanding, says, instead of saying, "Son, I bet you tried your hardest and that's really wonderful," his response is, "What, are you stupid? What, you're just not trying, right? What is wrong with you, kid?" And this child's perception of himself, of performance and all that, is distorted in what I call the superhero perception. It's got to be, everything should be done properly. It should be exact. It should be just right. And it's an unrealistic, unattainable perfectionism that can result. That's a traumatized perception. And then when the prefrontal cortex tries to problem solve, the solution is just going to make it worse and just creates more stress. And with the problem solving, what that does is it allows the brain itself to inform the mind consciously of an actually rational solution. And that's why for many, the somatic homeostasis is just fine. They haven't had those kind of life experiences where it was either modeled for them or imposed on them to see things in distinctly distorted way, which under unmanaged or unmanageable stress is distorted.
Yeah. Which is interesting that you brought that up, because that kind of also creates an answer for the last question, you know, what is mental health looking like for millennials these days and for the next generation? I think one of the biggest problems they have is just poor modeling, poor parenting, which is not a knock on parents out there. I know parents try their best, and we always have to try our best.
But they've also brought their own trauma into the parenting.
This is where that generational trauma conversation comes into play, and how parents are managing and self-regulating their own stress or not.
Particularly not
not,
like the
is
dad.
influencing and creating the stress for the children. I know that's just one more thing to add to parent stress of, oh gosh, I'm screwing up my child. But it's more of how can we grow, right?
Yes.
How can we grow as parents? And one of the easiest ways, especially for young parents out there with young children, one of the easiest ways to help your child self-regulate is for you to self-regulate, because you're modeling. Your kid is always watching you, and so if you can self-regulate, your kids are gonna follow suit. Like they're gonna pay attention to that.
But we're back to what the airline personnel. If the oxygen mask drops, the parent, put it on yourself first, and then you're in a position to care for your child.
Yeah.
And so many parents, they don't put their oxygen mask on first. They're all about putting it on their child first. Can't tell you the number of times I've had sessions where a parent has contacted me and, can you do this treatment with my child? And I gently I would encourage you to do that yourself first.
Yeah.
And then you can support your child in doing it.
Which shows just how much they care about their child.
Absolutely.
They want to help. They just don't know how.
Yep.
And part of that is just, and this is the same thing with therapists. We want to help our clients. We want to help them. But it starts with us first. Yeah. We have to do our own work.
Yeah. So your experience of the problem solving.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of how you described it. I mean, it was weird. But
unusually beneficial.
Yes. I mean, it was. I mean, we worked on a problem that I had just been rolling around in my head, and one of the ways I like to describe it is, and I think I described it with you, is when you just can't think. For me, I'm a big movie guy. I love movies. I love TV, television, film. And every once in a while, I'll see a guy in a show, and I'm like, I know that guy. Right? Where's he from? And it kills me because I'll be thinking about, and I just can't get it. Right?
Yeah, and nobody else experiences that.
No, it's just me, guys. So if you're listening, you're wrong. But
you're not struggling with it the way I am.
And this is a pretty comical. Like there's ways that we can apply this to real life, right? But for me, I'll be thinking, and I'm like, all right, whatever. I can't figure this out, right? And so I'll start to go to bed, and then like right before I fall asleep, I'm like, it was that guy, right?
Yes, because
and I remember
that is an involuntary autobiographical cognition or memory. Your brain is doing the thinking and just informing you.
Yeah.
And that's what the problem solving.
That's exactly what it's like, except it's for problems that are probably more of an actual problem than I can't figure out who this actor is.
Like what do I do with this major life decision?
And it's usually quicker.
Or a core issue like abandonment.
Exactly.
Or neglect.
Exactly.
Or relational stress.
And it seems to take less time than, like for me, it'll be hours sometimes before I can think of an actor's name, for example. But for the problem solving, when we were working on this specific problem I was having, it took me 40 minutes, something like that.
Yep.
So,
and your brain resolved a very significant problem that you had struggled with for a while.
If you just give your mind the space and time, my other supervisor, Trey, he puts it really beautifully, where it's like a puppy, right? If we don't give our mind attention, right, it's going to go make a mess. It's going to go pee on the carpet. It's going to go dig up the dirt in the backyard. And for us, our mind is very similar, right? It's going to go create higher forms of stress, higher forms of anxiety, depression, if we give the puppy attention, right? If we give it the space to just be, it's going to have space to be.
Yeah, that's so good. And you also did the spiritual formation one. So you've done the whole thing.
Body, mind, and spirit.
What would you say about that one?
I mean, nothing that I haven't already said. I mean, it's very similar to the cognitive one, but it's directed towards the spirit, it's directed towards the soul. And I am a pretty spiritual person. I identify as a Christian, and for me, it was just a very special time with God to speak with me. And again, just really allowing myself to slow down. Which again, when previously when I had done that session, I was working 70 hours a week. Like I was going. And
I
just
remember those days.
yeah, right. And I just had such a hard time just giving myself the space to think, to be with God. And so for the spiritual formation, it was really just allowing myself to slow down. But it's different in the sense where it was allowing, just that homeostasis to take place and to just be in your best position to hear from God, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe how I would describe it.
Yeah, it's a very direct, intimate moment with a very loving being.
It felt very meditative, which is what prayer is. Prayer is meditation. And it felt like a very effective way of facilitating that.
And I've done it with people of very different faiths and very different spiritual belief systems, and it just brings homeostasis into that space. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about all of that properly. We're going to have some episodes in the future where we're really going to go into some deep dives there in the cognitive and the spiritual formation. But Josh, I've just loved having you in this space and listening to you. And I feel really honoured to know you in this community. But before we go, I wanted just to ask you, what are some of your hopes and dreams for the future?
Just personally, professionally, both.
Well, big question.
You as Josh.
Me as Josh. I mean, I just, one of my biggest joys is just serving my community and really, especially with the work I'm doing now, I just really view my work as service. Like, it's something that just brings me so much joy. And so my hope is just that continues. And my hope is, I continue to be able to be the best, to be able to provide the best service I can for others and to use these platforms that you guys are using for your podcast and for me and my podcast. And, that's another really big benefit with the digital spaces. We can, as professionals, provide accurate information. And so, if I could share a story, I just recently read the book, The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk. And he had this story in there that was really beautiful, that I really resonated with. It was the story of how we should wash our dishes, right? He says that the majority of us, we wash our dishes so that we can go and drink our cup of tea afterwards in typical Buddhist monk style, right? Because I know everybody just drinks tea.
I do.
That makes sense.
But that's a cultural thing.
Yes. But he says that typically we're rushing, we're doing our dishes so that we can go drink our cup of tea, right? In other words, for maybe us Americans, right? Is so we can go watch our Netflix, or so we can go read our book, or do the next thing, whatever is really important, right? But what he says is that when we live this way, right, we're not really living. We're actually incapable of living a single moment of our life unless we wash the dishes to wash the dishes.
Yeah, and that's being present.
And I think AHA, the mentorship and the counseling that comes with therapy creates a really beautiful space for that. It's not the only way, but it creates a really beautiful space for that, right? To learn how to self-regulate, to learn how to cope with the stress and anxiety and depression. That is just natural with life. Everybody struggles with it. And I know that is so, we drill that again and again and again, but people just don't get it. Everybody struggles with it. Anybody who says any different is lying.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that we can all wash the dishes to wash the dishes. We can all live our life presently, mindfully, and with peace.
Yeah. And if there is, if you reflect on your experience of the somatic homeostasis, and then the cognitive and the spiritual, because it's focused on interoception, that awareness of how do I feel, what is my body experiencing, it is the most fundamentally present moment with ourselves, because that is the nature of our existence. That is the nature of our beat.
Yeah.
You need to learn how to be by yourself and how to live with yourself. You say this again and again. Who's the person you spend the most time with? Yourself. 24/7.
Yeah.
You don't get a break, right? You got to learn how to live with that.
Yeah. Josh, thank you. I so appreciate
Thank you.
your
I really
spirit,
appreciate this.
your interest, and becoming a provider for Autonomic Healing.
Yeah. I'm excited.
We're excited. And just listeners, be sure to check out Josh's podcast, Cow with Korac. And I'm sure, Josh, this won't be the last time we have you on this podcast in this space as we continue to explore the benefits of autonomic healing.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.